Hi, I'm Eliza. And yes, my mother slapped me across the face on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. Not metaphorically, not privately. Right in front of a garden full of guests at my engagement party, moments before I was meant to walk down the aisle and toast my future. Why? Because I said no. I refused to give up my $50,000 wedding fund money that had been mine since I was 17, so my brother could blow it on his second chance at love and third attempt at stability. But this wasn't the start of the chaos. No, this was just the point where their masks slipped. The whispers, the fake emails, the attempts to sabotage my job, my relationship, everything. All to protect the golden boy, the one who always crashed but never burned, because someone else was always thrown in the fire for him. Turns out I wasn't the daughter, I was the lifeline. The sky above the vineyard was soft and peach-colored, with fairy lights strung above us like delicate constellations. The breeze carried hints of lavender and the earthy scent of tilled soil. It was a scene plucked from every Pinterest board I'd ever saved. Rustic tables, clinking glasses, laughter that warmed the afternoon air. But under all of that perfection was a current something I hadn't yet named, but felt. Dorian, my fiancé, stood across the patio near the bar, laughing with my cousin Miles. Rolled sleeves, champagne flute, that easy smile that made people trust him instantly. I loved that about him, how grounded he was, how real. He was my anchor, which was ironic, because everything else in my life felt like it was about to drift. My mother, Helen, was doing her usual political rounds, gracious, smiling too wide, the picture of Southern elegance in a lilac blazer that cost more than most people's rent. My father, Warren, was close behind, saying nothing as usual. His silence had long stopped being comforting. These days, it felt more like permission. I was sipping a mocktail when I heard the clink of silver on glass. My stomach dropped. "May I have your attention?" Helen called out sweetly. But even the sugar in her voice couldn't mask the steel underneath. The room felt quiet. Dorian made his way back to me, sliding a hand gently onto my back. Helen raised her glass. "We're just so proud of our Eliza," she began, all smiles and faux warmth. "She's grown into such a thoughtful, accomplished young woman. And Dorian, we couldn't be more thrilled to welcome you into our family." The crowd clapped. Someone whistled. I smiled, albeit tightly. Then she said it. "And while we're talking weddings," she continued, her tone shifting slightly, "there's something we've been discussing as a family." I went cold. "As many of you know," she said, "Eliza has had a $50,000 fund set aside since she was a teenager. A gift from Warren and myself, to be used for her future wedding." Nods and soft gasps. People looked impressed. And then, but, she pivoted, her brother Kyle is getting married next spring. And, well, life hasn't been as kind to him. Student loans, failed ventures, it's been rough. I knew what was coming, and I couldn't stop it. So, we've decided to split the fund, $25,000 for Kyle and his fiancée, and the remainder for Eliza. The silence was louder than the claps had been. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. "No," I said. Clear, measured. Some people chuckled awkwardly, thinking maybe I was joking. "I'm not sharing it," I added. "That fund was mine, you gave it to me. I've spent my life planning responsibly. I'm not giving it up because Kyle made bad choices." Helen's smile faltered. Kyle, standing near the dessert table, looked away with that trademark fake humility. He wore like cologne, overpowering and always slightly off. Helen stepped closer, glass still in hand. "We thought you'd be more understanding," she murmured. "You always had more than him, Eliza. Don't you think it's time to give a little back?" "Sharing isn't generosity when it's forced," I said. "It's theft dressed in pearls." She clenched her jaw, then turned back to the crowd with a brittle laugh. "Well, let's all enjoy the rest of the evening." The party limped along after that. Conversation felt forced. Smiles were strained. I stood near the pergola as twilight deepened, feeling like the ground had subtly tilted beneath me. Helen found me again, alone this time. "You should think about postponing," she said quietly. I looked at her. "Why? Because Kyle's broke?" "Because it would show maturity," she replied, "and grace. It's not just your day. It's a family milestone." "No," I said, voice firm. "It's my wedding, and I'm done making it about everyone else." She didn't argue. She just turned and walked away, leaving behind the scent of lavender and lies. Later that night, back at our townhouse, I opened my wedding binder to a blank page and stared at it. Nothing came. No excitement, no inspiration, just dread. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. I whispered into the quiet, "This is supposed to be my wedding, but it already feels like a negotiation." And something inside me cracked. Not from pain, but clarity. They weren't trying to help Kyle. They were trying to keep him afloat at any cost, even if that cost was me. By morning, the weight of everything sat on my chest like an anchor. The sun streamed through the blinds in soft stripes, warming the sheets, but I didn't feel it. I'd barely slept. My mind had looped the night before, like a cursed carousel. Helen's polished announcement, the crowd's confusion, the way Kyle just stood there acting like it was a noble solution. Dorian stirred beside me, reaching out instinctively, half asleep. "You okay?" he asked, his voice still husky with sleep. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I lied. Just tired." He didn't press. That's one of the reasons I loved him. He never tried to fix what he didn't understand. He just stayed close, like a dock that waits for the boat to come back on its own. I dragged myself to the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee already in the air. He'd made it, like he always did. Little things that said, "Love louder than any speech." As I poured myself a cup, my phone lit up. One buzz, then another, then four more. At first I assumed it was the wedding planner or work. But then I saw the names my Aunt Rita, my cousin Jules, even Kyle's girlfriend. The first message read, "Eliza, he's your brother. Maybe think beyond yourself for once." The next one hit harder. "Cold move at your own engagement party. That's supposed to be about family." And another, "He would have done it for you." I set the phone down, the screen face down. Like that could make it all stop. I hadn't said a word online, I hadn't posted, I hadn't explained. But somehow, the family chat had already picked its villain. And it wasn't Kyle. Dorian handed me a piece of toast I hadn't asked for. "She's working the phones, huh?" I nodded without lifting my eyes. "I'm the selfish one now," I said softly. "Kyle's the underdog. And I'm the cold-hearted sister ruining the dream." He leaned on the counter, crossing his arms. "Let me guess. They forgot the part where you actually saved that fund for a decade." I smiled, but it was tight and brief. Apparently, that part doesn't matter. I spent the next 2 days trying to shake it off. I buried myself in errands, busy work, anything that didn't involve a screen. I even reorganized the entire pantry by expiration date. But no matter how many drawers I cleaned, the silence from my parents felt louder than anything. Except it wasn't really silence. It was silence aimed at me, and noise broadcast everywhere else. On the third morning, I had an appointment with a boutique I'd been secretly excited about. It wasn't the flashiest or the trendiest, but it had a quiet elegance, like the kind of place where you said yes to more than a dress. You said yes to yourself. I stepped into the changing room, the assistant helping me into a gown made of soft ivory satin. Lace climbed my shoulders like vines, delicate and strong. As I turned toward the mirror, something about the reflection felt right for the first time in days. I looked like someone ready to start something real. Then came the knock. "Miss Lorne?" the assistant asked gently. "There's a woman asking for you. She says she's your mother. She says it's urgent." I didn't flinch. "Send her back," I said. But I'm not changing. Helen walked in less than a minute later. Calm, poised, performing. She gave me a once-over and offered a sigh that dripped with artificial warmth. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." "That dress, it suits you." I didn't answer. She took a step closer. "I'm not here to fight. I just think we need to talk. Clear the air." I turned slightly, facing her in the mirror. "There's nothing unclear, Mom. You stood in front of 50 people and tried to take something from me like it was a group decision." She winced like the truth stung. "You always make things sound worse than they are." Before I could respond, she did something I hadn't anticipated. She staggered. One hand went to her chest. She let out a gasp. "One. I can't breathe," she said, eyes fluttering. The assistant rushed in, panic flashing across her face. Helen sank slowly into the chair, clutching her chest. "Call someone," she whispered. "Please." I didn't move. The paramedics arrived within minutes, efficient and calm. They took her vitals, asked her questions. After checking her heart rate, one of them turned to me. She's stable. No arrhythmia, no signs of cardiac distress. Might be stress-related. Of course. Helen waved them off, insisting she didn't need a hospital, just needed to sit a moment. When the last medic exited, I leaned in. Quiet, sharp. You staged that. Her lips barely moved. I don't know what you're talking about. I stepped back. Don't insult me. You used to at least try to be subtle. She rose slowly, smoothing her jacket like she'd just been crowned instead of caught. You used to care when I was hurting, she said. I used to believe you were hurting, I replied. That evening, I got a call from the boutique manager. Hi, Eliza. Just wanted to confirm, did you want to cancel your fittings and transfer your deposit? My stomach dropped. No. Why would I do that? There was a pause. Well, your mother came to the desk after the paramedics left. She said the wedding was postponed, that you were under too much stress to make any final decisions. I closed my eyes. She had no right. Please reinstate everything. And if she ever calls again, I want to be notified immediately. The manager's voice softened. Absolutely. You're our bride. Only you. I hung up and sat on the couch, still in the dress, still reeling. Later that night, I pulled out an old photo tucked deep inside a desk drawer. It was me and Kyle, maybe 15 and 13. His arm draped over my shoulders. We were smiling. But even then, my smile looked practiced. Performed. I ran a finger across the edge of the photo, letting it sit in my palm a few extra seconds. I used to think there was a version of us that could have been close. But maybe that was just another story I was told to believe. I spent the next morning combing through paperwork. I remembered there were documents that proved the original terms of the wedding fund. Sure enough, I found them 2 separate custodial accounts, both opened the same year, same amount, same terms. One account had grown, the other, completely empty. Guess whose was whose? I went to pour myself some coffee, and that's when my phone buzzed again, another tag, this time on a story. I didn't recognize the username, but I clicked. There he was. Kyle, shirtless on a boat in Lake Havasu, red Solo cups stacked behind him. Someone yelled out, "Shout to Kyle for renting this beast." The next clip showed him in Gucci slides and oversized designer shades, lounging like a man without a single financial concern. That's when I opened his most recent message to me. "We're still waiting on your response about the fund. Be decent." I laughed. Not loud. Just a single dry breath. That was the moment something shifted. It wasn't about the money. It was never just about the money. It was about who Kyle had always been, and who my parents kept letting him be. So I started a new folder on my laptop. I titled it, Just in Case. Screenshots, receipts, messages. Every piece of proof I could gather. Because I wasn't going to be gaslit into silence. Not again. Later that day, a message came in from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Jared. He'd gone to college with us, though he'd always been closer to Kyle. It simply said, "Hey Eliza, just so you know, your brother still owes me $1,200 from that sneaker thing. Told me I was investing. Never paid me back." I responded with, "Thanks for the heads up." Then he sent a voice note. I almost ignored it, but I didn't. His voice was calm, but you could hear the bitterness beneath. "Your brother's been scamming everyone for years, including your parents. He's not struggling. He's addicted to appearances. I used to think he'd grow out of it, but now I think he just learned how to play the game better." I sat there, frozen, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel cornered. I felt clear. By the time the sun had started slipping behind the trees, I was still sitting at my kitchen counter, laptop open, documents spread out like a war map. My phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail from Melissa, my cousin. I didn't even think before pressing play. Her voice was low, hesitant. "Hey, Eliza. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about what happened with you and Dorian. I had no idea he'd cheated. I hope you're doing okay. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." I froze. The words didn't register at first. Cheated? I hit pause and replayed the message. The second time, my stomach turned. This was new, and it wasn't true. My heart picked up pace. Another message came in from someone else. "I hope you're healing. That kind of betrayal is hard. Just know you're not alone." I stared at the screen like it might offer a punchline. None came. Without wasting another second, I called Melissa. She picked up quickly, probably expecting gratitude or tears. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked. Her tone changed instantly. "Your mom called. Said the wedding was off. Said Dorian had been unfaithful. That you were dealing with it privately." My voice was like steel. "That's a lie. A complete fabrication," Melissa stammered. She sounded convincing. She said you asked her to help you manage the fallout and wanted to keep it quiet. I ended the call without saying much else. I didn't have the energy to clean up someone else's story. I had my own to hold together. I opened my email and scrolled through the inbox. Subject lines like "sorry to hear," "thinking of you," and "here for you" cluttered the top. I clicked one from Lauren, an old college roommate. She was kind but distant. Still, her email was full of warm sentiments. "I got your message. Just wanted to say I respect your decision. Prioritizing your healing is never a mistake." The signature said it was sent in response to an email that, according to my inbox, didn't exist. Then I noticed the address. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. One extra letter, a domain slightly off, a fake email. Someone made a fake account pretending to be me. They used my name to send out a cancellation notice. A short message, carefully worded, full of subtle heartbreak and false closure. It said the wedding was postponed due to betrayal and emotional trauma. It signed off with my full name. I didn't cry. I didn't even panic. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was identity theft, narrative theft. Someone out there wanted to write my story for me, with themselves as the editor. I texted Dorian, "We need to talk. Urgent." He was still at work. I didn't wait for him to respond. I started pulling everything I had: screenshots, voicemail transcripts, side-by-side comparisons of the real and fake email accounts. I organized it into folders, labeled dates, flagged suspicious contacts. I'd been accused of being over-organized more than once. For the first time, that felt like an advantage. When Dorian got home, I didn't say anything at first. I handed him my phone. He read the messages, played the voicemail, and then opened the fake email. His expression didn't change, but I saw the pulse in his jaw, the way his hand curled slightly at the edges. "They're not just trying to sabotage the wedding," I said quietly. "They're trying to erase me before I ever arrive at the altar." He nodded slowly. "This isn't just emotional abuse anymore. This is targeted, calculated defamation." I leaned back, my fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "Do you still believe me?" He looked at me with something soft, but unshakable. I never stopped, not for a second. The next morning, I stepped into the office, coffee in hand, trying to fake normal. My boss, Sarah, met me near the elevator. Her expression was concerned but composed. "Eliza, can we talk in my office for a second?" I followed her inside. She closed the door gently, like bad news was fragile. "We received something unusual," she said. She slid a printout across the desk. It was a screenshot of an anonymous email sent to HR and several team leads. The subject line said, "Know who you're working with." The email linked to a video grainy, low-res, and clearly fake. But if you didn't know me well, it might look convincing. A woman who resembled me, in a dim-lit room with a man I'd never seen before. The voice was wrong, artificial, like someone had stitched together pieces of my old interviews and videos to make a deepfake. It was sloppy, but terrifying. Sarah didn't blink. "We know it's not real. HR's not pursuing anything. But I wanted you to be aware. We're keeping this internal." I nodded, but inside, I felt like the floor had disappeared. I thanked her and left early. I didn't lie. I really wasn't feeling well. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the windows rolled down, hands gripping the wheel like it might float away if I let go. I whispered to myself, "They're not attacking the wedding. They're attacking me." Back at home, I called my attorney, Colin. She was direct and thorough, with a calm that made you believe you weren't crazy for being hurt. "That's enough," she said after hearing the details. "We'll escalate. Cease and desist. Digital harassment. We can build this out." By the end of the day, we had the first documents drafted. The notice was formal, sharp, and clear. It outlined everything: identity fraud, workplace interference, emotional distress, defamation, and malicious intent. We sent it directly to Kyle and, separately, to my parents. I didn't write any emotional preamble. No hope you're doing well. Just the facts. The paper trail was undeniable. IP addresses, timestamps, faked accounts, all of it meticulously logged. I didn't wait for a response. But the silence that followed, it was loud, and it was telling. I forwarded everything to Kaylin, just in case. She emailed me back within the hour. This was strong. You're not just protecting your wedding, you're protecting your identity. She was right. This was no longer about money or a party or a fund I'd saved since 17. This was about boundaries, truth, the right to tell my own story. That weekend, Dorian and I met with our planner, Jocelyn. Her office smelled like eucalyptus and soft ink. Her team moved like a quiet storm, precise, organized, efficient. We sat down and went through the guest list. I didn't hesitate. Remove Kyle, remove Helen, remove Warren. No second chances. Jocelyn looked up, eyebrows slightly raised. No contact? None, I said. They're not even allowed in the parking lot, Dorian added. Send their photos to security. If they show up, escort them out. No scene, no warning. Jocelyn scribbled notes like she was drawing battle plans. Understood. I'll flag the venue and brief the staff. Is there a safe contact you want us to use if anything escalates? I handed her Colin's card. If they have anything to say, they can speak to my lawyer. I'm done. As we were leaving, Jocelyn hesitated. Just to be sure, are you ready for how this might ripple? I looked her dead in the eye. I'm not the one causing waves. I'm just done drowning. That night, I sat on the couch, wedding binder in my lap. The glossy cover reflected my face, tired, but calm, not broken, just sharpened. Dorian walked over, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. They mistook your silence for weakness, he said. Not anymore, I whispered. When I woke the next morning, there was a manila envelope on the kitchen table. Dorian had retrieved it from his office mail. It had no return address. Inside were 5 printed images, screenshots from the fake video, grainy and deliberately vague. On top was a single handwritten note. Are you sure she's the one? No signature, just that. That was when I knew. They weren't just trying to damage my name. They were trying to destroy my future. I held the note like it might catch fire in my hands, my eyes scanning the words over and over as if some hidden meaning might rise from the ink. Are you sure she's the one? That wasn't a question. It was a seed of doubt, wrapped in menace, disguised as concern. And the timing wasn't random. Nothing in this war had been. This wasn't some desperate last-ditch attempt to guilt me. It was a slow, intentional unraveling, thread by thread, until the fabric of my life came apart in someone else's hands. I looked at Dorian, his mouth pressed into a flat line, eyes dark and steady. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He knew that kind of message isn't about panic. It's about pressure. It's about planting an idea and stepping back, hoping it grows into something that chokes you from the inside. But they'd misjudged me. Again. Later that day, I sat in Colin's office, the manila envelope open on the table between us. She studied the screenshots with her usual composure, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. We're past cease and desist, she said flatly. This is grounds for civil harassment, digital defamation, and possibly criminal impersonation. If they sent this directly to a workplace, we're looking at corporate interference too. I nodded, silent but focused. I wasn't rattled anymore. I was ready. We filed new paperwork that afternoon, a formal escalation that included every documented incident to date, with a timeline that could make any judge raise an eyebrow. Colleen drafted language so sharp it almost cut just reading it. She knew what I needed now wasn't comfort. It was clarity backed by law. Back home, I sat at the kitchen counter again, laptop open, every file neatly organized, every name and date logged like a catalog of betrayal. I wasn't keeping score, I was keeping receipts. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. And if no one else would protect me from my family, then I would. That night, I pulled up an old contact I hadn't spoken to in years, Alicia. She dated Kyle briefly during his Arizona phase, back when he was still pretending to be a visionary entrepreneur instead of a serial disaster. I hesitated, but then hit call. To my surprise, she picked up on the second ring. "Eliza?" Her voice was cautious. "I didn't expect to hear from you. I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't serious," I said. "Did Kyle ever try to ruin your life when you broke up?" There was a pause, then a laugh, dry and low. "You mean the fake Venmo requests? The messages to my boss calling me unstable?" "Yeah. I lived that movie already." "Why?" I exhaled. "He's doing it again. But this time he's using my parents to co-sign the chaos." She went quiet for a moment. "If you need anything, I kept screenshots. I never deleted them. I just didn't know who to send them to." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I finally wasn't the only one holding the match in the fuel. "Send them to me." It's time someone else started talking. Over the next few days, more puzzle pieces fell into place. Messages Kyle had sent to vendors under fake emails. An attempt to cancel my venue reservation by pretending to be Dorian. Even a fake Yelp review about my wedding planner, posted under a burner account that traced back to Phoenix where Kyle's girlfriend lived. One by one, the illusions crumbled. And under every lie was a pattern. Take what isn't his, deny, blame someone else, and move on like nothing ever happened. But this time, I wasn't moving on. I was moving forward. And there's a difference. The turning point came the following Thursday when I received a message from Jolene, my cousin who never fully picked sides but always seemed to know what was going on behind the curtain. "Heads up," she texted. "Your mom was at the venue today. Staff said she asked about delivery schedules and catering drop-off times. They didn't give her anything, but she's planning something. Be ready." I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the message, my mind already cataloging what could happen. An uninvited arrival, a public meltdown, maybe even a last-minute attempt to block the ceremony. And for a second, I felt tired. Just deeply, bone-wearily tired. But it passed, because I wasn't the girl at the pergola anymore, wondering if I was being dramatic. I wasn't the daughter who second-guessed herself, while her mother rewrote the narrative in real time. I was the woman who had built a fortress out of truth and called it peace. And I wasn't afraid of an ambush anymore. The morning of the wedding came quietly. The sky above Flagstaff was soft and cloudless, a cool breeze sliding in through the pine trees. The venue buzzed with movement, white chairs lined up in tidy rows, floral arches wrapped with lavender and ivy, soft string music floating on the air. In the bridal suite, my stylist adjusted the final curl in my hair, her hands gentle but steady. I didn't feel nervous. I felt anchored. Like no matter what happened next, I knew exactly who I was. No illusion could shake that now. Dorian was already outside, pacing lightly near the altar, checking his watch every few minutes. Not out of nerves, he was waiting for something unspoken. We both were. At 1:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. Jolene again. She's here. With Kyle, they tried to go around the side gate. I showed the text to Marcus, our head of security, who nodded and stepped outside. Within minutes, they intercepted them near the service path. Kyle raised his voice, talking about family and forgiveness. Helen tried her softer tone first, saying she just wanted to talk. When that didn't work, she snapped, "I'll sue this venue. You can't keep a mother from her daughter's wedding." Marcus didn't flinch. "You were removed from the guest list by the client. You'll need to leave now." They didn't fight much after that. They turned, walking away like they weren't just rejected from a wedding, but from a story they no longer controlled. At 1:30 p.m., the ceremony began. The harpist played softly. My Uncle Lawrence walked me down the aisle. I breathed slowly, one step at a time, the wind brushing against my veil like a whisper saying, "Keep going." But 10 steps in, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, already knowing who it was. Helen. Her eyes burned, her voice low but brittle. "You're really going to destroy your family over this? Over money?" I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. "You destroyed it yourself." I just stopped pretending it wasn't broken. Her hand came fast, a sharp crack against my cheek. The crowd gasped. The music stopped. For a second, the entire garden held its breath. I stood tall, one hand to my face, eyes locked on hers. "You did that," I said softly. "In front of everyone." Kyle stepped forward, but before he could speak, Dorian moved between us. Calm, unflinching. "Touch her again, And you won't just regret it, you'll pay for it. I lifted my hand. No. Let her dig her own hole. We'll let the law handle this. From the third row, my godmother Elena calmly dialed her phone. Yes, she told the dispatcher. We need police at Whisper Pines Garden venue. Physical assault, wedding event. Helen froze. Sirens echoed in the distance minutes later. 2 officers arrived and approached gently but firmly. Were you struck? One asked. I nodded. Yes. By her. Helen stammered. It was a misunderstanding. Just a private family moment. The officer shook his head. It's also assault. You'll need to come with us. Handcuffs clicked. Guests whispered. Some recorded. Most just watched. As she was escorted out, Kyle yelled something I didn't catch, but I didn't care. He followed behind. Not arrested, just lost. And for the first time, I didn't feel rage. I felt nothing. And that felt like peace. Dorian stepped beside me, reaching for my hand. You want to stop? He asked gently. I shook my head. No, this is still our day, the harpist resumed. The guests stood, and we began again. We said our vows with voices that didn't shake, and when we kissed, the applause felt different. Not polite, not formal. It was triumphant, not because we were married, but because we were still standing. The morning after the wedding didn't feel like a fairy tale or a movie ending. It felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. Everything was quieter. The sunlight, filtering through the window, wasn't dramatic or glowing. It was just soft, gentle, like the universe had finally stopped shouting at me. I sat on the small balcony of our apartment, wrapped in Dorian's old flannel robe, sipping coffee that had long gone cold but still felt like comfort. My wedding dress was folded in its garment bag, untouched since I'd changed out of it at the venue. The gifts were still boxed. The flower arrangements were slowly wilting in glass vases near the dining table, but even that felt okay. Things were allowed to decay now. I didn't have to preserve every little detail, just to prove something to anyone. We hadn't posted anything about the wedding online. No curated slideshow, no captioned love letter. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about reclaiming something that had nearly been taken from me. For once, I wanted silence that meant peace, not punishment. But peace doesn't last long when you're related to people who treat drama like oxygen. 3 days later, I was standing in a grocery store, trying to remember if we needed garlic or just thought we did, when Jolene called. Her voice dropped the moment I picked up. Don't freak out, she said, which of course guaranteed that I would. But word is Kyle's wedding is being planned at the Ridge. I froze, one hand still on a lemon. The Ridge was the most expensive resort in the state private villas. Helicopter photo ops, a spa where even the brochures wore designer fonts. I'm sorry, what? I said slowly. Jolene exhaled. Yeah, big loan. From your parents, apparently. Rumors they put down a deposit already. My grip tightened on the fruit. So Kyle gets to walk down a gold-plated aisle while I get slapped for refusing to split my own fund? Jolene stayed quiet, but I could hear the answer in her silence. That night, I lay on the couch, Dorian's head on my lap, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the line of his jaw. He's using their money, I said. After everything, they're still choosing him. Dorian didn't look up. They didn't lose you, Eliza. They gave you away. And they didn't even ask what it would cost. I didn't cry. I just let the truth sink in like a stone settling in deep water. Later, when I opened my phone, I saw a text from my father. Just 4 words. Sorry it went that far. No context, no apology. Just that usual brand of avoidance wrapped in artificial remorse. I stared at the message, then tapped and held the thread until the block option appeared. It didn't hurt. It didn't feel like anything. I blocked both him and Helen. From now on, if they wanted to talk, they could talk to Kaylin. I was done playing translator between delusion and reality. A week passed, then 2. Slowly, word began to spread. Not through me, but through the small fractures in the family's perfect image. People started declining Kyle's invitation. Some gave polite excuses. Others were direct. After what they did to Eliza, I'm out. Aunt Marla posted a cryptic Facebook status. There comes a time when protecting someone's failure means losing someone who's always been good. No tags, no names. But the message was clear, and this time, I didn't rush to fix it or clarify. I let it breathe. Because the version of me they had built, the selfish daughter, the unstable bride, the cold sister, that version didn't hold up under real light. It shattered. One night, while Dorian and I were walking through downtown Flagstaff after dinner, I stopped mid-step and said, "I want to change my name." He tilted his head, watching me. "To what?" I smiled. "My grandmother's maiden name. Before any of this became a performance." He nodded. "Then we'll do it. Whatever helps you feel like yourself again." The next morning, we filled out the paperwork. Simple, quiet, permanent. I didn't need to burn bridges. I just needed to stop setting myself on fire to light paths for people who never planned to walk beside me. A few days later, while organizing receipts from the wedding, I realized something. After everything, the dress, the venue, the cake, the security, we still had just over $6 left from my original fund. I looked at the number on the statement for a long time. I didn't want it sitting there anymore. It felt like a relic from a life I no longer wanted to return to. When I brought it up to Dorian, he didn't hesitate. "What do you want to do with it?" I told him about a nonprofit in Prescott that helps women leaving emotionally abusive families, legal guidance, transitional housing, therapy. "I want to send it there," I said. "Turn the wreckage into something that saves someone else." He blinked slowly, then reached for my hand. "That's the best thing you could do with it." So we did. We signed the paperwork, sent the check. I included a small note. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering who you are and refusing to apologize for it. We didn't take a photo of the donation. We didn't post a caption. Some things are just for your soul. When we got home, I opened my laptop for the first time in days. One message stood out in my inbox. Subject: "Please talk to me. I miss you." Sender: Marvin Lorne, my father. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it would say. I simply forwarded it to Colleen, archived the thread, and shut the lid. Letting go isn't always about forgiveness. Sometimes it's about choosing peace over noise, choosing your own breath over someone else's guilt trip. That same afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and found Dorian assembling a bookshelf from a kit we'd been meaning to put together for weeks. The instructions were vague, the screws stubborn, the whole frame slightly crooked, but it stood. That was enough. I handed him a photo from our wedding, the one where he was wiping a tear from my cheek while I laughed through it. We slid it into the center of the top shelf. On either side, we stacked cookbooks, framed quotes, and a potted plant that was somehow still alive despite my neglect. I stepped back and looked at it. "That's us," I said quietly. "Not flawless, but standing." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was soft, real. It was the kind of silence that feels like a full exhale after years of holding your breath. I didn't check social media that night. I didn't scan emails or watch for messages. I just existed, fully, calmly, without dread. Then, as if the universe wanted one final test, I got a message from Dreama, a family friend who had always been in the periphery of the drama but never played a direct role. It simply said, "Eliza, I've never seen you look more like yourself. I hope you stay there." I read it twice, then once more for good measure. I didn't respond, not because I was cold, but because I didn't need to. That message wasn't a lifeline. It was confirmation. Later that evening, Dorian surprised me by hanging our wedding vows above the bed. He'd printed them in soft ink, framed in reclaimed wood. One line was highlighted: "Love doesn't keep score, but it remembers who showed up when it mattered." I touched the glass lightly, tracing each word with the tip of my finger. We weren't perfect, but we were whole. Not because we were untouched, but because we had been tested, and we chose not to break. A week after we donated the remaining wedding fund, I stood outside Hope Circle, the Women's Center in Prescott. The building was modest, almost hidden between two larger medical offices, but there was a calm around it, a stillness that felt earned. Dorian waited in the car while I went inside. A counselor with kind eyes and sun-worn hands greeted me and thanked me for the donation. I told her no need to thank me. Just use it for someone who thinks they don't have choices. She nodded and asked if I wanted to leave a message with a gift. I paused for a long moment, then said, Tell them healing doesn't mean pretending it never hurt. It means choosing not to let the pain speak for you anymore. She smiled, and something in my chest finally let go. On the way home, the sun set behind the mountains in long golden lines. I rolled down the window and let the wind tangle my hair without fixing it. Some messes don't need cleaning. Some just need space to breathe. Back in Flagstaff, life began again, not with some grand declaration, but with little rituals. Sunday pancakes with too much syrup. Dorian humming off-key while folding laundry. Quiet walks through neighborhoods we didn't know yet. The boxes from the wedding were still stacked in the hallway, untouched. And for once, I didn't feel guilty about not rushing to sort them. Not everything needs to be unpacked all at once. Sometimes the healing is in knowing it can wait. The morning light kept showing up whether I checked my inbox or not. The plants by the window kept leaning toward the sun, without anyone telling them which way was right. And I started to remember how to live without preparing for a battle. But closure doesn't always mean silence. Sometimes it comes in waves, in whispers, and loose ends that show up when you least expect them. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a thick invitation on heavy paper, cream-colored with embossed lettering. Kyle and his fiancée were officially inviting me to their ceremony at the Ridge. The irony was almost too rich to taste. A handwritten note accompanied it, unsigned but familiar. It said, "We're starting over. Maybe you'll see that eventually." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The gesture wasn't a peace offering. It was a performance, just like everything else had been. And I wasn't in the audience anymore. A few days later, Colleen forwarded me an update from the local courthouse. A formal complaint had been filed against Kyle, nothing explosive. Just the beginning of a civil inquiry involving misrepresentation and electronic impersonation. The lawyer for one of his former business partners had finally had enough. I read the document like I was reading someone else's story, detached, observing. There was no thrill, no satisfaction in it. Just a quiet recognition that people who refuse to see their reflection eventually break every mirror around them. Meanwhile, social media started to catch up. A lifestyle blogger who'd attended the wedding wrote a post about it, about the slap, the police, the resilience. She didn't use names, but the comments section filled in the blanks fast. The post went viral. People shared it with captions like, "This is why boundaries matter, and protect your peace like your name depends on it." My phone buzzed for days, but I ignored most of it. I didn't need validation. I just needed the truth to have air. And it did. Jolene texted me one afternoon with a screenshot from Kyle's wedding registry. She didn't say anything, just sent it. I stared at it for a moment. The list was excessive designer luggage, custom kitchen appliances, even a hand-painted globe marked with dream destinations. It wasn't the items that got me. It was the sheer oblivion. The same boy who'd asked me to split my wedding fund was now asking strangers for luxury candles that cost more than my first rent check. I closed the screenshot without replying, not out of pettiness, but because the lesson had already been learned. Some people would rather live in a fantasy than fix the damage they cause. And I didn't owe him my audience anymore. Dorian and I spent the next few weekends building small things together. A garden box that never drained right. A makeshift bookshelf that leaned like it had a personality. A playlist for road trips. A life that didn't need to be filtered through survival anymore. One night, while curled up on the couch, I told him something I hadn't said out loud yet. For the longest time, I thought I had to keep earning love, like it was something I had to prove over and over. He didn't interrupt. He just let me keep going. But it's not. It's not a currency. It's a mirror. It reflects what you accept, what you believe you deserve. He kissed the side of my head and whispered, "You deserve everything that doesn't make you flinch." We never framed the viral post. We never responded to the gossip. But we did frame the photo of us dancing under the garden lights. After the ceremony, my hair still tousled from the chaos, his shirt slightly wrinkled, both of us laughing like we hadn't just survived a war. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. That was the only legacy we needed. I started journaling again, not to process pain, but to record peace. I wrote about the smell of fresh basil in the kitchen, about the way Dorian looks at me when I'm not paying attention, about the way quiet doesn't feel empty anymore. One entry stood out. I wrote, "Family isn't who demands the most from you. It's who protects your soft places when the world forgets you're human." I underlined it twice, then added, You don't owe loyalty to pain just because it raised you. That line sat with me for days. Not bitter, just true. Eventually, I did speak to Elena, my godmother, the one who called the police the day of the wedding. We had tea on her back porch, the sun dipping low behind her rose bushes. She didn't ask questions. She didn't analyze anything. She just said, "You came through the fire, child. You didn't come out clean, but you came out free." I held her hand a little longer than necessary when I left. The last message I received from my mother came a month after everything. It wasn't an apology. It was a photo of the family from some beach trip, with a caption that said, "Wish you'd been here." No explanation, no context, just the usual script. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. I didn't forward it to Callan. I didn't archive it. I just let it go. Some stories don't need another chapter. They just need an ending. Today I'm sitting on my porch, wrapped in the same flannel robe, sipping coffee that's gone cold again. The cactus in the window has bloomed for the first time. Dorian's inside, laughing at some dumb documentary. My life is small right now, but it's mine, and for the first time, I don't feel like I have to apologize for it. To anyone out there still wondering if it's okay to walk away from people who share your blood but not your values, let me say this: your peace is not a betrayal. Your silence is not weakness. And your boundaries are not cruelty. They are love letters to the version of you who waited too long to be protected. If this story reached you, I hope it reminds you that healing doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it just looks like staying soft, staying clear, staying true. I didn't win. I didn't burn it all down. I just stopped handing them matches. And that, for me, was enough. Story 2, my name is Soraya, and here is the tale of how my spouse believed he could outsmart me. It began with murmurs in the shadows. I never made any bank transactions, and a name I had never heard of before, Ilyamaro, Declan. My spouse had more in mind than simply leaving me. He intended to steal everything. However, he misjudged me. He believed that I would break. I took the initiative instead. What was mine, I guarded. And his whole scheme failed a week later. The treachery alone, however, wasn't the worst part. It was the amount of time he had spent preparing it, the number of falsehoods he had spoken, and the extent to which he was prepared to go in order to ruin me. The bed was empty when I woke up. Declan had been gone for some time, based on the cool sheets next to me. I initially believed that he could have gotten a drink of water or gone to the restroom. However, I heard his voice, low and whispered, as I sat up and wiped the sleep from my eyes. Be cautious. A sliver of moonlight came in through the window, creating shadows on the floor, but the hallway light was out. As I followed the sound, my gut wrenched. Just a bit more time. Still, she has no suspicions. Mid-step, I paused. My breath caught. Declan's voice was soothing and soft, as if he were soothing someone. My ribs were hammered by my heart. To whom in hell was he speaking? I strained to hear more as I stood there, but the words that came next were muted. He lowered his voice to hardly more than a whisper. I balled my fingers into fists. This was no late-night business call. Declan never muttered on business calls. Hell, he didn't even mind if I heard what he was saying before. My thoughts were racing with potential outcomes. They are all worse than the prior one. A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps coming closer. He came around the corner just as I was about to go back to the bedroom. I crawled beneath the blankets and pretended to sleep, but my pulse was pounding. I felt the dip in the bed a moment later. Beside me, his weight moved, but I continued to breathe steadily. After a few minutes, he let out a leisurely, comfortable breath, as if nothing had occurred. I rolled over and gave him a quick blink. You were where? I sounded like I had just woken up, sleepy and soft. Restroom. Without hesitation, he muttered. The phone call, and a lie. Declan flinched just a little. Only a customer. For a case, various things had to be clarified. I kept my eyes on him, waiting for any hesitancy. He looked at me. As usual, it is unreadable. Perhaps I was thinking too much. Perhaps it was work. That whisper, however, the phrase. Still, she has no suspicions. I pushed myself to roll over after swallowing the lump in my throat. Even though my intellect was screaming at me, I chose to ignore it. Not this evening. Not quite yet. I got up earlier than Declan the following morning. He was still sound sleeping, Where my head should have been, his arm hung over the pillow. Taking my phone, I snuck out of bed and walked barefoot to the kitchen. Normally, I didn't look at our financial accounts. I had never really thought about it, since Declan was in charge of the most of the funds. But something didn't feel right. I went through the transactions and scrolled. My stomach grew constricted. $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000. In the last 3 months, there have been 12 withdrawals. Despite their relative smallness, they are all common enough to cause concern. Declan and I split the cost of groceries, electricity, and the mortgage. However, we also kept separate accounts for our own expenses. These transactions had nothing to do with bills, investments, or anything we had talked about. My fists clenched around my phone as I took a trembling breath. I heard footsteps behind me. After swiftly locking my screen, I turned to see Declan scratching his neck while leaning against the doorway. "Good morning," he said, his voice heavy with slumber. "For breakfast, what?" I put my phone down. "That's what I was going to ask you." Grinning, he moved ahead to pour himself a cup of coffee. "Then I suppose it's your turn." His free hand was lying on the counter as I watched him take a sip. This morning, I looked at our bank account. Declan was momentarily frozen, just enough time. He squeezed the cup tighter, then he stifled a laugh. Additionally, there are several minor withdrawals. I folded my arms. Things I'm not familiar with. He hardly hesitated. Only modest financial outlays. A couple of business prospects for business. Declan put down his cup and nodded. There is nothing to be concerned about. Gains for the short term alone. He was telling lies. I was aware. I just had no idea why. I made an effort to get rid of the uneasiness for the remainder of the day, but Declan wasn't cooperating. He was in the next room, answering calls while riveted to his phone. When he placed his screen on the table, it was always facing down, and each time I gazed at him, I got the impression that a wall had been built between us that had never been before. My thoughts wouldn't stop racing that night as I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. Declan has always been a slick, self-assured man who could charm his way out of any situation. However, I'd known him long enough to see when something wasn't right, and it was unquestionably wrong. I looked over at him. He had fallen asleep already. He breathed steadily. His expression was serene, as if he had nothing to conceal. I wasn't persuaded. The words I had been attempting to ignore all day were uttered by a voice in my brain. Is anything truly wrong, or am I just being paranoid? Even when the early light came in through my window, the doubt persisted. I had slept through the whole night, unable to get rid of the uneasy sense that something was really off. I could still hear Declan's voice from the previous evening. The tone someone used when concealing something in plain sight was casual, dismissive, yet planned. My actions seemed robotic as I dragged myself out of bed and went about my daily ritual. I couldn't stop thinking about every conversation I had had and every warning sign I had disregarded in the previous few months. Then, as if nothing had happened, Declan walked into the kitchen. "Good morning, sweetie." He kissed my temple quickly and murmured that. I was thinking that, simply in case of crises, we should probably organize our finances. My fingers clenched around my coffee mug as I froze. Our finances, I carefully echoed. As if this were just another conversation, he sipped his coffee while leaning against the counter. For example, do you have a complete list of all of your assets, passwords, accounts, etc.? Everything should be kept in one location. I gazed at him, my heartbeat beating in my ears. Declan had never taken an interest in my own finances. Sure, we had a joint account for payments, but we always kept our personal funds separate. It was just the way we had always done things. I swallowed, forcing a neutral expression. I guess I could put something together. His lips curved into a small smile, but his eyes flickered just for a second. He nodded like it was no big deal before changing the subject entirely. But my mind was already racing. This wasn't about us. This wasn't about just in case of emergencies. Declan was preparing for something. And whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it coming. That evening, Declan was uncharacteristically relaxed. He laughed at the TV, scrolled through his phone like nothing was wrong, and even suggested ordering takeout. He was playing the role of a doting husband perfectly. And that's what made my skin crawl. Something had shifted in him. The way he walked, the way he spoke. It was all too easy to well rehearsed. Then it happened. Declan got up to take a shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. He never left his phone unattended. Ever. I gazed at it, my heart rising. The screen was facing down, just way it had been for weeks. But then, as if the world was tossing me a lifeline, a notice flashed up the screen. A SMS message from a name I didn't recognize. Elia Moreau. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed for the phone, my hands shaking as I tilted the screen. Just enough to read the message preview. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost there. My breath caught. My chest constricted so rapidly it ached. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me. Who the heck was Ilya Moreau? And what did they mean by almost there? My fingertips hesitated on the screen for half a second, just long enough for the craziest things to pass across my head. Was this another woman? Was Declan intending to abandon me? Was he concealing money? I heard the water go off. Panic surged through me as I placed the phone back precisely where it had been and collapsed into the couch, squeezing my knees to keep my hands from shaking. A minute later, Declan came back into the room, towel drying his hair. I pushed myself to look at him. He was so peaceful, so at ease, fully ignorant that I had just witnessed something I wasn't allowed to. "Did you decide on dinner?" he questioned, ruffling his hair. I swallowed hard. Not quite yet. He grabbed his phone without a second glance, unlocking it effortlessly. No hesitation. Like there wasn't a darn thing to worry about, but I knew better now. I spent the rest of the night attempting to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe that wasn't what I thought. Maybe it was a coworker, a business partner. Perhaps there was another reason for keeping me in the dark, something harmless, but I knew better in my heart. The parts were coming together, one by one. The money vanishing, the concealment. The call came through in the dead of night. The unusual interest he showed in my financial situation. That's when I should have challenged him. But I needed evidence if I was correct, and Declan was indeed concealing something so significant. Actual evidence. So I didn't say anything instead. I gave him a goodnight kiss and let him go under the blankets, as if nothing had happened. After that, I laid there speaking into the dark while holding my phone. Ilya Moreau, who the heck is she? The question was still bothering me the next morning, eating away at every idea I had. Like a ghost going through the motions, I went about my daily ritual, but Ilya Moreau was the only thing on my mind. I couldn't get the name out of my head like a puzzle piece that didn't fit but wouldn't go away. At breakfast, Declan sat across from me, contentedly browsing through his phone. I questioned whether he knew I had seen that message. If he did. He was a really talented actor. However, he looked up and grinned as though he could sense my doubt. "Can you sign anything quickly, darling?" My coffee almost suffocated me. "What's a sign?" With a soft voice, I asked. "Just a few tax-related financial updates." Sliding a paper across the table, he said. Although his tone was informal, there was an irregular rhythm to the way his fingers pounded against the table. A clue. My stomach churned as I picked up the papers and quickly read the first page. The paper was loaded with legalese. However, it became painfully obvious that this had nothing to do with taxation. I turned to the property transfer agreement's final page. My ears throbbed with my heartbeat. My condo, my savings, my possessions. His name would be added to everything. I made myself glance up. Declan had a cautious smile on his face as he observed me. "Declan?" My voice was too controlled as I spoke. "What is this?" He continued to smile. "Babe, it's simply a precaution. A convenience for the law. Between us, nothing changes." I tightened my hold on the page as I gazed at him. "Nothing is altered. You want me to give you a copy of everything?" "Not all of it." As if that improved things, he spoke smoothly. "Simply putting everything in one place for safety, in case something goes wrong." My hands shook a little. Out of anger, not fear. This was no longer paranoid. I wasn't reading too much into this. This was prearranged. He even dared to sit across from me and pretend it didn't matter. Slowly and deliberately, I put the document back on the table. Then I looked into his eyes. "I will not sign this." For a brief moment, his jaw tightened and his smile wavered before he burst out laughing. "Don't be theatrical, Soraya. It's only paperwork." I didn't back down. "But why are you so anxious that I sign without first reading it?" His face grew stern. "Soraya, you really don't want to do this?" His voice was controlled, and low as he leaned slightly closer. However, beneath it was something. A threat. A warning. I stared at him without flinching. Is that dangerous? Declan took a moment to respond. Rather, he crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his face changing into a potentially unintelligible expression. A disquieting calm took the place of the smirk he had been wearing just moments before. His voice was too smooth to be measured as he said, "I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be." I suppressed my rage and maintained a neutral face. He continued to believe that he was in charge and that I was merely another move on his meticulously constructed chessboard. I allowed the silence to grow as I observed his idle tapping of his fingers on the table and the tiny movement of his jaw when I remained silent. He was awaiting my response. To become sentimental, to become alarmed, to shatter. I smiled just enough to make him shift uneasily, but not enough to give him the satisfaction he wanted. "Declan, you know what?" I said softly as I got up and gathered the documents. "You're correct. I really should give this some thought." He narrowed his eyes a little. I had already turned away and walked to the kitchen, setting the documents neatly on the counter, but he wasn't expecting that. I had no intention of arguing. Not right now, not quite yet, because I had taken charge now. Declan pretended nothing had happened that evening. He made himself a drink and walked around our house as if we were just another happy couple, watching the news, scrolling through his phone like he didn't just try to con me into signing away everything I owned. However, as I observed him, a conclusion weighed heavily on my chest. Our marriage had never been in danger of being saved. He wasn't trying to fix things. He was getting ready to go and wanted to take everything with him. The next morning, I found him in the living room, sipping his coffee like he didn't have a single worry in the world. But when I sat across from him, he glanced up immediately, sensing that something had shifted. "We need to talk," he said, setting his cup down. I tilted my head. "Oh." He exhaled, as if this was difficult for him, as if he was the one struggling. "I think we should separate." There it was. He spoke it like a guy delivering a well-rehearsed speech, every syllable carefully measured. "It's not functioning anymore." He maintained his tone even. "You have to see that." I gazed at him, motionless. He wasn't asking for a divorce. He was telling me it was occurring. I let a beat pass, then another, before I finally spoke. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" A glimmer of something crossed his face. Gone before I could name it. "It's for the best, Soraya." We've grown distant. Grown apart? That's what he was going with. I leaned forward, putting my arms on the table. "You mean you want to out, but you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed?" His lips pinched into a narrow line, but he didn't dispute it. I could have yelled. I could have hurled the nearest thing across the room, but I didn't, because something had moved inside me. A steel resolve that hadn't been there before. So I leaned back in my chair, tilted my head slightly, then as gently as I could, I spoke the words that would change everything. I already relocated my valuables. Declan's whole stance tightened. His breath hitched. Not enough for someone else to notice. However, I did. "What are you saying?" His tone was too controlled and too piercing. I grinned. Slow and methodical. It's exactly how it sounds. He tightened his jaw. He had spent months planning this, setting up every tiny detail to make sure he won, and I saw it the moment he realized he had lost. However, he had misjudged me. He detested that. We were silent for a long time. At last, Declan let out a quick breath and got to his feet. He picked up his coffee, sipped it slowly, and then turned to face me with a gaze that made my blood freeze. He smiled again, but it was icier this time, calculated. "Soraya, you will regret this." She couldn't tell if it was a desperate bluff or a threat. In any case, she was prepared. It was her time now that Declan had played his hand. The air felt thicker than normal in the morning, while I went about my daily business. The apartment's stillness weighed heavily on me, and the coffee felt harsh. I vowed not to let his remarks from the previous evening affect me. Then the door was knocked on. A shrewd, measured bureaucrat. After putting my coffee down, I inhaled deeply before opening it. On the opposite side was a man with a huge envelope in his hands, wearing a blue jacket. Keller, Soraya. Indeed, his face was expressionless as he held out the packet. "We've taken care of you." As I watched him leave, I clenched my fingers around the papers. The envelope felt more substantial than it ought to have. I knew what it was without opening it. Nevertheless, I made myself sit at the kitchen table, letting out a short breath before removing the papers and slipping my finger beneath the flap. A request to dissolve a marriage. I quickly perused the paper. I'm landing on the request for money. Declan wasn't simply walking away. He desired half of everything. The car, the condo, half of our joint assets. Additionally, spousal support because he was so bold. I shook my head and laughed bitterly. He believed he could take everything, of course. This was something he had been preparing for months, if not longer. My husband was a frigid man. However, this was a premeditated move. The air was heavy with the scent of newly printed papers and polished wood. I was sitting opposite my lawyer. As she reached the financial breakdown, she scanned through the documents, smirking softly. She tapped her fingernails on the desk and murmured, "Well, he has nothing." That's exactly how I lifted my eyebrows. She looked up, laughing. As simple as that. Before he filed, you transferred everything into a trust. He is therefore lawfully denied entry. He is capable of pursuing spousal support. But taking into account your past earnings in comparison to his, it isn't taking place. My shoulders finally relaxed from the tension I had been carrying since that knock on my door. As I exhaled slowly, I felt like I had real control for the first time in weeks. All this time, Declan had believed he was the one planning the game. He had misjudged me. I was pouring myself a glass of wine that night when the front door slammed open. I didn't flinch at all. Declan stood there, waves of rage washing over him. His jaw was clenched so tightly, and his tie was loose. I thought I heard him grind his teeth. "Don't you think you're very intelligent?" His tone was piercing and poisonous. I sipped my wine slowly, enjoying the way his rage swirled around him like a tempest. I believe I'm at last taking care of myself. At his sides, his hands clenched into fists. "You had this planned?" I tilted my head and put down my glass. "You did too." Between us, there was a thick silence filled with unspoken accusations. Finally, he let out a quick sigh, muttering as his eyes darkened, "It's not over yet." I let out a slow breath. The war had only just started, but I had already won the first battle. I was somewhat relieved that Declan was no longer controlling my finances for the first time in weeks. However, I should have seen that he would not go in silence. At work, the first indication of problems appeared. It began with looks, long-lasting stares, rather than the typical fleeting glances. Whispers that stopped as soon as I walked into the room. By mid-morning, Rachel, my assistant, was hesitant to enter my office. "Hey, you ought to be aware of something." Already tired, I looked up from my laptop. "What is it?" She made an uncomfortable change. "There is a rumor circulating." She drifted off, wringing her hands, but I didn't want to say anything. "Tell me, please." Rachel sighed after hesitating. "You allegedly embezzled funds from your joint accounts." "That you were." She took a deep breath. "Money laundering?" I gazed at her. The remark struck like a blow to the head. "What?" "I don't think so," she said hastily. "Declan, however, he has been conversing with others. Mutual friends and lawyers. The word is getting out." Anger rose in my chest like wildfire as my gut wrenched. Declan had more in mind than simply stealing my money. He was attempting to destroy me. I was struggling to keep my composure by the time I arrived at my lawyer's office. This must end immediately. The stack of printed screenshots was slammed into the desk by me. My hands are trembling with anger. Patricia, my lawyer, looked at them and laughed dryly. "He's definitely desperate. He is disparaging me." "Yes, but that's useful." She tapped her pen against her desk while leaning back in her chair. "He exposes himself to defamation charges if he is circulating incorrect information. If he disregards it, we send a cease and desist first. We intensify." I tightened my jaw. "I don't want the legal proceedings to continue on. All I want is for him to quit." Patricia let out a sigh. "Soraya, he's attempting to lure you. He wants an emotional response from you." She is correct. I turned to see Beatrice standing with a knowing expression at the door. "Your next course of action cannot be dictated by him." As she said, she moved forward. "He wins because you respond too quickly." I nodded rigidly, swallowing my rage. But I was boiling inside. Declan desired combat. He was going to receive one. I discovered him in one of the most exclusive eateries in the city, La Rue, drinking and laughing with two coworkers. The impression of him sitting there, utterly unmoved, as if he hadn't been smearing my name in the mud for the last 3 days, made me furious. I didn't create any commotion. I refrained from screaming. I didn't have to. I just approached the table, leaned in, and muttered, "You don't know what you've just begun." For a brief moment, Declan's grin wavered, but he quickly covered it up with a casual smile. He used a handkerchief to wipe his lips, challenged glistening eyes. "Well, let's see what you have." I had warned him once again. I was done being fair now. Declan had been attempting to dominate, threaten, and manipulate me for weeks. I had always been underestimated by him. He was now taking one more shot, after ruining my name and failing to collect my money. A man who is desperate is dangerous. My phone rang in the middle of my morning coffee. Patricia. Before she had said a word, I responded, feeling the urgency. "You must enter," my attorney stated without introducing himself. Declan just submitted a request for a thorough financial audit. My body jolted sharply at the words. I cautiously put down my coffee and took a big breath. "For what reasons?" Patricia let out a breath. "He's alleging that you owe him money because you misused common finances. The point isn't that it's total rubbish. Naturally, it wasn't." I mumbled. "He's attempting to drain me. Legal charges, stress, and time. He is aware that he cannot win. He wants to exhaust me then." That's right. My chest twisted with a stinging bitterness. Declan was never an absolute winner. He played till his opponent was exhausted. "Not now. In an hour, I'll be there," I said, then hung up. Patricia had Declan's motion laid out on her desk, marked in red, by the time I entered her office. She looked up and said, "Here's the good news. Not a single piece of credible evidence supports his claims. The bad news? If the court accepts his strategies, this might still take weeks or perhaps months to resolve." I balled my fists up. "What should we do next?" She answered, "We counterfile and ask for an immediate dismissal. Additionally, we insist that he cover all legal fees, whether this is considered a delay tactic by the court." I grinned. "Come on, let's do it." I ended up sitting across from Declan in a courtroom 2 weeks later. His tie was a bit too tight, but he was well dressed. His smile was hardly disguised. This, he believed, was his time. First to stand was his attorney. "According to my client, Your Honor, Mrs. Keller may have wrongfully transferred assets in order to evade a just divorce settlement. We are asking for a thorough forensic examination of every financial transaction that has taken place throughout the last 6 months." I didn't respond. I didn't recoil. Patricia, as composed as usual, rose up and adjusted her spectacles. "Your Honor, before Mr. Keller ever filed for divorce, my client made all of his financial decisions. There is no proof of fraud or poor management." She pushed forward a heavy binder. "We further urge that Mr. Keller be held liable for all legal expenses and that this action be rejected with prejudice." Considering that this is obviously an effort at financial harassment, the judge's countenance was inscrutable as they took their time going over the materials. The atmosphere was quiet and anxious. Declan kept an eye on me, anticipating my wriggling. He didn't get the gratification from me. The judge glanced up at last. "The court determines there is no need for a thorough financial audit. The motion is turned down. Additionally, Mr. Keller will be liable for all legal expenditures related to this claim because there is insufficient proof." The gavel clapped sharply. Declan had just lost once again. Declan passed me silently outside the courthouse, but he whispered something loud enough for me to hear. "You think this is over? Simply wait." Even though I had won this round, I knew Declan had one more move to make. He's the kind of man that doesn't leave gently. They refuse to concede. They reorganize, rethink their approach, and return with something even worse. He had been planning this for too long, Declan, to let it go. Right here. It didn't take me long to figure out his last move. The following morning, there was a call. "We have an issue, Soraya," Patricia stated. I tightened my hold on the phone. "Now what?" A silence was followed by the shifting of papers. "Ilya and Declan have formally complained. You are being accused of financial fraud. They have proof that you have been fabricating financial documents for months." The breath from my lungs. I wouldn't simply lose money if this accusation were to hold up. There may be real legal repercussions for me. They turned in papers. Patricia went on in a strained voice. "You will be compelled to participate in a criminal investigation If the court finds this to be significant, the earth swayed a little. I forced myself to remain composed as I pushed my fingertips to my temple. What about the papers? Are they authentic? On the other end, a scarf? Not at all. They're good, though. They were doctored. Of course. Ilya. Declan's every action is guided by an unseen hand. But before I called you, Patricia said, I had Beatrice look at them. She also discovered something. A glimmer of optimism. What? The financial transactions had timestamps that she recognized. They were forged by someone, but they were unaware of a crucial element. At the time of the purported transactions, those accounts were non-existent. I ejected a sharp breath. That was it. The error that would destroy them was that one. Something sharper took the place of my dread. Declan desired conflict. All right, I was going to stop it. I had already decided by the time I got to Patricia's office. I was determined to do more than simply protect myself. I intended to bury them. I want to take the initiative. With my palms flat on her desk, I said, not only to have my name cleared, I want to defeat them. After examining me for a while, Patricia nodded. Well, we have enough to complete it. She indicated a folder. A forensic financial analyst was contacted. What Beatrice discovered was validated by them. The papers were altered. Sharp and content, she grinned. Thus, this is what we do. We submit a motion demonstrating the falsity of the papers. We then file a slander and falsification of evidence lawsuit against Declan and Ilya. I gave a nod. I also seek full damages. Patricia, obviously satisfied, reclined back. I was expecting you to say that. I had my final court appearance with Declan 2 weeks later. As Patricia presented our argument, I kept a careful eye on him. She was precise in her speech. The room echoed with her voice. These documents were falsified and used as proof against my client. We have unquestionable evidence that the stated financial transactions never took place. On the stand, the forensic analyst described each altered number and fictitious timestamp. Declan's attorneys wriggled. They were aware of their defeat. Then, the last blow was delivered. Patricia put the judge's desk down with a fresh folder. Your Honor, my client is countersuing Mr. Keller and his partner, Ilya Mauro, for defamation and submitting fabricated legal proof in light of these false allegations. It was deafeningly quiet in the courtroom. Declan's attorney turned to him and said something urgent in a whisper. Declan's jaw remained fixed. He had a pallid face. At last, his attorney got up and cleared his throat. My client would like to withdraw his claims, Your Honor. He did, of course. There was nothing he could do. The magistrate gave a nod. The motion was denied. Additionally, all legal fees will be borne by Mr. Keller. Declan had lost badly. Declan went silently by me as we left the courthouse. I didn't stop him. I didn't have to. Before I whispered, loud enough for him to hear, I gave him a few steps. This is where we're done. In months, for the first time, something I had nearly forgotten came back to me. Calm. No more hearings in court. No more dangers. Don't wake up in the middle of the night any longer. I was afraid of what Declan might do. I had one. It didn't seem like a significant triumph. Not the way I thought it would be. There were no big closing remarks or pyrotechnics. Nothing but quiet. The sort that occurs while the sky is still thick after a storm. However, the thunder has stopped, and I wasn't afraid of that stillness for the first time. Patricia and I had our final meeting 2 days later. A last stack of papers was slid over her desk. It's finished. The settlement was signed by Declan. With a deep exhalation, I hovered my fingertips over the documents before lifting them up. Even though I already knew the result, I skimmed the specifics. Declan received nothing, not a single penny. His financial claims were rejected. His lawsuit for slander failed. His reputation was destroyed. He had attempted to ruin me. And he was the one who ended up with nothing. Patricia watched me while leaning back in her chair. How are you feeling? I laughed quietly, sounding lighter and more exhaled. She grinned. Excellent. That is what you deserve. I gave a nod. Putting the papers in my bag. It was this. The last phase. I got up and held out my hand. I'm grateful for everything, Patricia. She gave it a vigorous shake. Soraya, go enjoy your life. You deserve it. And I believed her for the first time in a long time. Beatrice and my mother demanded a victory meal that night. When I entered Margot's house, she gave me a big embrace. Her eyes were filled with relief. "It's finished," she muttered. "Indeed," I whispered. "Yes, it is." Grinning mischievously, Beatrice poured champagne and held out her glass. "To liberty, and to never again allow a guy to believe he can outwit you." I laughed as I clinked my glass against hers. "That's what I'll drink to. We had some food, we conversed, we looked back, and I wasn't always watching over my shoulder for the first time in months." The next hit wasn't what I was waiting for. The conflict was finished. I stood on my balcony later that evening and looked out over the skyline of Chicago. The city lights glistened, reaching far into the distance. It all felt different. The lady who had disregarded the warning signals was no longer me. She was no longer the woman who had trusted in the false promise of security and stability. I had misplaced items, have faith, time, the kind of love I believed I had, but my strength had increased. Clarity, command. On the table next to me, my phone began to vibrate. I looked at the display. Unknown figure. I didn't think twice. Blocked. I returned my attention to my laptop. A blank document is opened. A fresh chapter. A fresh tale. My tale. I muttered as I closed my laptop. Now, here is my tale. Let me leave you with a thought to ponder before we conclude. We are often put to the test in unexpected ways by life. The folks who betray us the most are sometimes the ones we trust the most. Here's what I've discovered, though. Avoiding betrayal is not what strength is all about. What matters is how you bounce back from it. I could have allowed it to shatter me when I was on the brink of my marriage. I might have allowed uncertainty and fear to take over. But I decided to fight instead. Not only for my money, but also for my future, independence, and dignity. And this is what I want you to remember most from this narrative. You underestimate your strength. If you have ever felt that the rug was yanked out from under you, or if you have ever been caught off guard by treachery, you are aware of this. You're not by yourself. Even if life may throw you some curveballs, it's in such times that you find your true self. And sometimes the biggest success of all is to leave behind what no longer serves you. I'd want to hear from you now. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a circumstance where the odds were stacked against you? Leave a comment with your ideas. I've read all of them, so please leave a comment below or let me know where you're viewing from if this tale spoke to you. Naturally, you should press the notification bell and subscribe to the channel if you would want to hear more stories like this one. So much more is yet to come. Keep strong, keep intelligent, and never allow anyone to take away your strength till the next time.